Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today's Friday, so I wanted to talk about just one book that I read this week. Usually on Friday I go over every book that I read in a week, but I'm working on a separate video for one of the other books that I read this week, and I want to save my discussion for that for Monday because I really want to do a good job in talking about that book because it meant a lot to me and I thought it was really, really amazing. So in the meantime, I thought I'd talk about another book that I read this week, which was David R. Montgomery's book, The Rocks Don't Lie. The subtitle here is what caught my eye when I saw this in my local used bookstore. It's a geologist investigates Noah's flood, which is meant or signaled to me while I was looking at it in my local used bookstore that this was one of the many, many books that have been published that talk about, in one way or another, the intersection between science and faith or religion, which is obviously a tried and true subject for dorm room conversations and books of all manner, whether they be scholarly or otherwise. But I had yet to read a book on this tried and true subject that was specifically about and from a geologist. So I thought, why don't I give that a shot and see how it is? And I think it was very much what I expected it to be, because geology does not necessarily have the reputation of being the most flashy of the sciences, and this is certainly not the most flashy of books on this topic. There were definitely times when Montgomery was talking about his specialty, which is, of course, geology, that I was a little bit fatigued. Let's just say geology is not going to be something that I spend a lot of time reading about, I don't think. But that nevertheless, David Montgomery really did do a good job of laying out his arguments and whatnot. And one of the big things that he talks about here is borne out in that title, which is that the rocks do not, in fact, lie. They might not be jumping up and down and telling you the most interesting things in the world, but if you know how to read the stories that they tell, then you can unpack what is necessarily true about the world that we live in, because, well, the rocks can't make anything up. They just sit there. And it takes a specialist like Montgomery to figure out what they're saying and what they reveal about the world that we live in, which I think is really interesting. I would actually like to read something by Montgomery that really unpacks his own relationship with his own field, because geology is like any other subject, which is that once you get into it, once you really unpack everything that can be learned about a subject, or at least the closer you get to it, the more it opens up and expands and becomes interesting. And so while geologists might not have the reputation for being the most fun at parties, I'm sure that Montgomery has some interesting stories to tell about his relationship with his own field and how he got into it. But regardless, just focusing on the book today, specifically this book and how well it works, I think he does a really great job overall of talking about just the possibility of a flood, and whether or not that flood would be a global flood, whether or not it would be a local flood, and then also folding in and discussing all of the other flood myths that exist around the world. Obviously, on the YouTube space in particular, I've seen plenty of conspiracy videos and anything ranging from a really good high-quality discussion of it to a really bad, sensational, clearly clickbait discussion of the fact that there are multiple flood myths around the world. This is obviously no well-guarded secret, and Montgomery does touch on that and investigates certain reasons as to why there would be so many flood myths around the world, whether or not these flood myths are related to one singular big flood, whether or not they are stories preserving local floods and whatnot. But certainly I thought that all of that was very interesting as well. My only real criticism of the book is that throughout the book, Montgomery is talking about and investigating the existence of Noah's flood, specifically Noah's flood, which is not a problem. I totally understand why. But he fails to, I think, really address the fact throughout the book, and he does mention it. I'm not saying that this isn't something that he's hiding or something that he's trying to avoid talking about, but I would have spent more time, if I were David Montgomery, talking about the fact that when we talk about Noah's flood, we're talking about much more than just a big cataclysmic flood that may or may not have happened. We're talking about a story, and that story has particulars to it. It has details in it. It has a central and specific character, that being Noah. And that story was borne out in the Genesis account that we find in the Old Testament. So I actually went back and reread that account in my Robert Alter translation of the Hebrew Bible here. And so once I finished The Rocks Don't Lie, I picked this up and gave it a reread. And it is worth mentioning, of course, that when we talk about Noah's flood, instead of just talking about a big flood that happened one time, we're talking about, well, you know the story, but there's a world that is corrupt and filled with evil people. The God who is all-powerful and created those people, instead of saving them or helping them out in some way, just decides to kill them all. He decides to do that by flooding the world and sparing the only righteous person and his family that is on it, that being Noah. Noah is then instructed to build an ark, which he does. He puts 2 of every animal on it. They float on the sea for 40 days and 40 nights. Again, you know the story, but that's Noah's flood. Noah's flood is way more than just, well, you know, a big flood happened one time and a bunch of people probably died. No, it's a story that preserves details, and those details are important to talk about and address. If you're talking about specifically Noah's flood. And it's the same thing that happens when you're talking about a debate between a Christian and an atheist, which obviously have been taken place for centuries and are bigger than ever, maybe now on YouTube, where there are, you know, countless debates between atheists and Christians. And naturally in those debates, the question of whether or not there is a God comes up and is relevant to that conversation. But it's also important to recognize that when those conversations are happening, the question of whether the God Vishnu exists or not is not being debated. The Christian God is what's being debated. And the Christian God is more than just a higher power. The Christian God has details. There are certain things that Nicene Christians, whether they're Catholics, Orthodox Christians, or Protestants, Nicene Christianity has a particular conception of who God is. God is made up of 3 persons, a Father, Son, Holy Spirit, co-eternal, consubstantial with one another, of the same substance. And of course, there's a whole heavenly host that include cherubim and seraphim, although obviously that can change too, depending on what denomination you're in. But the point is that we're not just talking about an all-powerful God of sort of nebulous features. There is very specific features that Christians have a conception of, and that is what's being debated. Not just the idea of a higher power, but also a higher power that takes the form of the way that Christians formulate the conception of God. And so too here with Noah's flood. It's not just that there may or may not have been a big cataclysmic flood, it's that this flood was also a flood that had Noah involved in it, and Noah was building an ark, and Noah repopulated the earth, and Noah put 2 of every animal on it, and again, you know the story. But yes, so I reread this, and I had fun rereading the Genesis account. It had been a long time since I had done it, and it just struck me as I was doing it, just, you know, how interesting it is as a story, how interesting it is as a, you know, sort of, you know, mythical foundation for a group of people, but also how laconic and frankly useless it is in establishing a cosmology. I mean, imagine if you were reading the Bible literally and you were trying to literally understand how you and I and the whole universe around us came into being, and all we had were this extremely laconic couple of sentences, really, about how God created the day and the waters and whatnot, and the animals, and it's just so it's sort of like if you were in an infinitely large cave that was infinitely dark, and all you had to do to light it up was like a single Christmas light. It's like it doesn't work. There's not enough there. There isn't enough material there to actually be able to do that. But if you imagine it as, the mythological foundations for a group of people who were writing at a specific time in a specific place over a specific amount of time, and then that led to changes, and that led to alterations and additions and subtractions and whatnot, then it does make sense why an entire cosmology would be about the same length as the story of Ham seeing his father naked, and that results in Noah giving a curse not on Ham, but on Ham's son Canaan. And that would make sense if you were talking about it in those terms, but not in terms of trying to understand and unlock how the universe came to be and whatnot. But it's all interesting stuff, and I don't mean to go on a rant. But those are just the types of things that reading a book like The Rocks Don't Lie will inevitably lead you to. So if any of that sounded interesting, I would definitely recommend that you give it a shot. For me personally, I don't think I'll be returning to it anytime soon. And in addition to that, if you don't think that any of what I said is interesting, then I don't think that this book is going to convince you of that for sure. But if you liked what I said here, and you want to give it a shot, then definitely, I don't think this will disappoint you. That's it. That's going to be it for me today. But I do want to say just real briefly before I leave, because I do take the weekends off from making videos, that this week has been a particularly pleasurable week for me on BookTube. I've had a particularly fun time making videos this week. I've been getting more attention off of my videos than I expected to, which has meant a lot to me. Recently, my subscriber count has ticked up just so much, and Joe Spivey made a video recently where he did a tag that I tagged him in, which meant a lot to me as well. So I feel definitely like I'm fully immersed in the BookTube community, and everybody has just been so nice and encouraging throughout this process. So I just wanted to say thank you about that, and I'm very excited to come back on Monday with hopefully a very good video on a very good book that I read this week. And that'll be it for me today. Thank you, BookTube.